mind is. Because who knows, if the soul may be taken at night, and then we would be no more. So it colors every minute or every moment of our life, as far as the impact of it in our life.
Okay, so I'm picking up on some common themes here across religions, and those are, one, avoidance of arrogance and hubris, acceptance of self and of one's contract with God. Now, that leads me sort of into my next question, which is, if we do have this personal relationship with God and we cultivate it through that vehicle of faith, however that manifests itself, or whatever shape that takes on in our lives, how is it that God responds to us? What does it mean when something bad happens? For instance, a lot of people in the wake of Katrina or in the wake of the tsunami even said, this is God punishing us for something that we've done wrong. Is that really true? And I mean, obviously, feel free to interact on this question. I'm sure that you have varying answers. But, if God is all-knowing and loving, then why do bad things like this happen if he is our creator?
Right. At seminary, I took a class on theodicy. And my best example when the professor and theodicy is the question of, if God is all loving, why do bad things happen? The judgment and justice of God. And the professor asked us to write a paper. And my best example was especially in the Judeo-Christian tradition, if our most sacred metaphor, if you will, of God is a parent wouldn't cause, an all-loving parent would not cause bad things to happen. So my example in my paper was, I can set the rules by which to live. I can set the safety rules, if you will, to my daughter and tell her, don't touch the stove because it's hot and you will get burned. But I cannot prevent her from touching the stove and I cannot prevent her from getting a burn if she does touch the stove. So bad things are going to happen if, she touches the stove. Now, as far as Katrina and the tsunami as punishments, that is not my concept of God. I would say that most Christians would not have that concept of God. There are a handful that do, and we have to be in dialogue, which is what's nice here, to be in dialogue with the differing views. But this is a flawed world. I mean, this is not a perfect world, and things are going to happen that we perceive as bad and horrific. People do die, people do get cancer, babies are born deformed, and that is where my faith comes in. And Safi was saying about hope. If I didn't have that faith, I wouldn't have the hope that things could get better.
So you're saying there is a great deal of human responsibility involved here, and that we have the ability to, not only cultivate our faith and keep that hope going and keep that hope moving, right? So we have a great degree of responsibility in that contract with God.
Yes, because our response to those tragedies would be our faithful response to God.
Okay, so in service.
In service, exactly.
Right. And do you have any response to that, Rabbi?
I agree with a great deal of what you said. I think the way people often phrase the question presumes that God has purposefully wrought these horrendous things in people's lives. But there's an enormous assumption there. And I don't believe that God operates that way. In other words, I don't blame God for the tsunami.
Right.
But I do hold all of us responsible for how we respond to it, and whether we respond with compassion and the help that's needed. This is not a perfect world. Right. We do not live in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. We left there a very long time ago. And we are out here in the world as it is.
Things happen.
And it's a very imperfect place. And in fact, from my perspective and my tradition's perspective, I don't see or understand that we were ever promised otherwise. The Torah, as I understand it, never says that this is an ideal world or is supposed to be. It is a world in which we are supposed to behave as properly as we can.
Yes, because it seems as though just given the nature of Mother Nature, we are constantly being tested. And perhaps it is true that, in our response, in our service, in our way of coping with disasters like Katrina, that is when we're ultimately, our faith is proven. Is that what you would, is that the way that you would put it?
No, because I don't think in terms of faith being proven. I don't use the word faith very often.
Okay. Why is that?
Trust in God, belief in God, drawing strength from God. But for me as a Jew, the issue of faith is not on the front line. The issue of how I act is always on the front line.
Okay.
And that is somewhat different.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for clarifying for me.
And maybe another sidelight to that is you speak a great deal about submission to God. And I understand that concept, but it's curious to me that the term for a Jew in Hebrew is Yisrael, Israel, and that means struggling with God. And for me, that's a more realistic metaphor of my relationship with God. That it is not just an issue of being subservient, it's an issue of a relationship, and it goes both ways. And I struggle with God. And I have good times, and I have not so good times, which is true of my human relationships also. I am close, I am more distant. I am close, I am more distant. And I think even Jewish liturgy reflects that. Sometimes in Jewish prayer we speak about God in the third person, we speak about God, and sometimes we speak directly to God. And we go in and out of speaking to and about God, and I think that's reflective of a very normal and healthy relationship, that we are sometimes closer, sometimes more distant.
Well, and I think that the tragedies that happen really does bring us closer into that struggle with God. Why? As a person of faith and a person of trust, I will ask, why did this happen? But like you said, I don't blame God, and then the struggle is, how do I respond?
Yes, and that's why when I look back and you list all the prophets, I would not have shared that list with you. For example, Noah. For me and for my religious tradition, Noah is not a prophet. God said, I'm going to destroy the world, wipe it out, build an ark, save yourself and your family. And what does Noah say? Sure. Fine, I'll do it. Look at what Abraham did in comparison. When God threatened to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham argued with God and said, are you going to wipe out the innocent along with the guilty? Now, it's not clear what that netted Abraham, but at least Abraham was a prophet from my tradition's perspective because he responded to God and because he defended people. And we compare him then with Moses, who is the quintessential prophet from Jewish tradition's perspective. When Moses was up the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights receiving the Torah, what were the Israelites doing? Building a golden calf. How much more heinous could it be? When Moses comes down and sees what they're doing and breaks the tablet, the part that people sometimes don't read in the book of Exodus is that God threatens to wipe them all out and begin again with Moses. And what does Moses say? No, don't do that. You need to forgive them. Abraham asked for justice. Moses goes higher, he asks for forgiveness. And they both struggle with God. So for me, they are both prophets. They argue with God, they struggle with God, and they defend people to God, and they seek justice and compassion. So I have a different perspective on that as well.
Sure. So, in terms of, like, as you're saying that the bad things happening and so on, and if, obviously this question is asked quite frequently, if God is all goodness, and if God is all knowing, and how come all these things happen? For us as Muslims, the issue really is, and again, it all has to do with the concept of God. Perhaps we'll talk about that later. But the issue is that through these events, we begin to see the power of God like for example the tsunami and the Katrina and these massive disasters that happen, we begin to see the power of God, and that how if as human beings, if we do not surrender, if we do not submit to the will of God, what will happen, much like what you were saying, that if, for example, if a child puts his or her hand in the fire, it's going to burn. There's a direct consequence to taking that action. Similarly, if we as human beings are resistant to surrendering to God, then there are certain consequences that we will face. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that we feel that God, Allah, as we call Him Allah, which, as a matter of fact, even to this very day, Christians who are Arabs, of Arab background, they use the term Allah for God. And even in Aramaic, the word for God is Allah. And that was the language of Jesus. And as a matter of fact, even in the Schofield version of the Bible, as late as 1950, the word Allah was in it. The issue is that again we see that Allah loves us so much that sometimes these events come in our lives that rather than having us suffer in this world, He takes us back. And especially those who are innocent, they go directly to paradise. And those who have not believed, and they had a chance to believe, like when I say the innocent, I'm talking about children, for example, they didn't really have a chance to believe. They didn't have a chance to consider any faith. They didn't reach that stage. However, when we talk about those people who had a chance, and when I say a chance, I mean they actually studied and they searched for the truth and they came to a certain realization. In our belief, and as Muslims, we believe that those people are responsible. However, a lot of adults who did not get the right message, God will give them a chance on the Day of Judgment. But that's again another whole issue. But what I'm trying to say is that these events, they show us the love of God, the love that Allah has, or God has for all of us, in the sense that we may get, this is Allah's way of stopping injustice that may be happening in the world that we don't know about, because God is all-knowing. And in this way, there may be people who have escaped justice and who may be afflicted in this way, whether it's a devastating cancer or some disease, whatever it may be, or some other catastrophe. By the same token, we see is compassion from God, because certainly those people who die in a situation that, like for example, a building collapsed upon them, or a tsunami happened, and so on. In the Islamic way, our Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, told us that these people are considered martyrs. And because they died not from something of their own doing, something happened that was beyond. So that in itself is, we see it as a mercy from God. At the same time, we see these disasters occurring as trials for us to bring us back to our senses, bring us back to what is the reason, why are we here on this earth, why are we living, why are these things happening, and so on. It gives us a chance to, in short, it gives us a chance to wake up. It's like a wake-up call for